Have you ever been caught off guard by a moment that changes everything? A moment where the line between friendship and something deeper becomes blurred? Tonight, I'm sharing a story that will leave you questioning the boundaries we set for ourselves. It's a story about loneliness, unexpected connections, and the power of desire. But be warned, this isn't just any story. It's a story that will make your heart race, your mind wander, and your emotions run wild. Are you ready for the unexpected? Let's dive in. That night, when my neighbor knocked on my door, I had no idea what was coming. It turned out to be the craziest and most exciting night of my life. It all started on a typical day, as I was just trying to pass a quiet evening alone, but the quiet of the house started to press in on me, turning into something more heavy and uneasy. I was alone again, another Friday night stretching ahead, empty and uneventful. My wife was at her book club, a monthly ritual that had become more about obligation than enjoyment. And my kids were away at a college party, leaving me alone in this big, quiet house. The loneliness had become a familiar companion, a persistent ache beneath the surface of my everyday life. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the endless stream of updates and notifications felt hollow and meaningless. A sharp rap at the front door startled me, breaking the monotonous hum of the evening. I frowned, surprised. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated for a moment, then got up from the couch, a sense of curiosity mingling with a faint unease as I approached the door. I glanced through the peephole. It was David, my neighbor. He stood on my porch, his brow furrowed with what looked like concern. He was a young man with a lean build and a disarming smile that he rarely showed, even when it was just a simple t-shirt and jeans. He was always dressed in a way that was both effortless and captivating. I opened the door, forcing a casual smile. "Hey, David," I said. "Everything okay?" His eyes, a deep, warm brown, met mine, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher passing through them. "Hey, Michael," he replied, his voice a low rumble that sent a surprising shiver down my spine. "Sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you had a wrench." He shifted his weight, his posture a mixture of awkwardness and boyish charm. I arched an eyebrow, trying to hide the sudden awareness that had settled in my chest. "A wrench," I repeated, forcing a chuckle. "What kind of trouble are you getting into?" He gave a small, self-conscious laugh, running a hand through his hair, a gesture surprisingly endearing. "My sink's acting up, and I can't seem to fix it. I thought you might have something that could help." "Sure, I have a whole toolbox in the garage," I said, gesturing for him to enter. As he moved past me, our shoulders brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of energy through me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, a product of the long, lonely evening. He followed me to the garage, the space feeling smaller and more intimate with his presence. The scent of motor oil and old tools mingled with the faint aroma of his cologne, creating a strange, unexpected mix that made my senses come alive. He watched me as I rummaged through the toolbox, his gaze lingering longer than necessary, a subtle pressure that made my skin tingle. "So," I said, forcing a casual tone to try to break the spell, "what kind of sink trouble are we talking about?" I handed him a wrench, our fingers brushing as I did. The contact sent another jolt of awareness through me. "It's just sputtering," he said, his eyes meeting mine, a flicker of something different passing through them. I tried tightening the pipes, but nothing seems to be working. "Well, let's take a look," I said, gesturing for him to lead the way. My heart was beating a little faster than it should. I knew that this was just a friendly interaction, a simple neighborly gesture, but the air felt charged, the tension building with each passing moment. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked behind him, the heat of his gaze, a tangible presence against my back. And that was when I realized this wasn't just a neighborly visit. There was something more, something brewing beneath the surface. Little did I know I was walking straight into a place that would change everything. The walk to David's apartment was brief, but felt like an eternity. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me. The way he moved, the subtle scent of his cologne that lingered in the air, the image of his eyes, that flicker of something unreadable within their depths. burned in my mind. It was a disturbing mix of curiosity and unease. This simple, neighborly favor was turning into something else, something that felt both thrilling and dangerous. His apartment was small but tidy, a stark contrast to the chaos of my own house. The living room was sparsely furnished, but it was clear that he had a sense of style. The walls were adorned with posters of bands and movies, a glimpse into a world that felt both familiar and distant, reminding me of my own youth. "It's just the bathroom," he said, gesturing toward a door off the hallway. "I'm sorry for the mess," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me, a slight tremor that I couldn't control. I followed him into the bathroom, the space even smaller and more intimate than the living room. The scent of his soap lingered in the air, mingling with the smell of damp tiles and metal. The sink was indeed sputtering, a rhythmic gurgling that seemed to echo the nervous flutter in my chest. He stepped aside, giving me space to assess the situation. I leaned in, examining the pipes beneath the sink, my hands moving instinctively, the years of household repairs coming back to me. He stood beside me, his body close, our arms occasionally brushing, each contact sending a jolt of awareness through me. "It looks like a loose connection," I said, my voice strained. "Nothing too serious." I reached for the wrench, my fingers brushing against his as I did. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a shock wave through my body, a warmth that lingered on my skin. He didn't pull away, his gaze fixed on my face, his eyes searching mine, the unreadable flicker returning with more intensity. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken questions and hidden desires. "Thanks, Michael," he said, his voice a low murmur that vibrated through the space, closer than necessary. "I really appreciate you coming over." He was standing too close, and I could feel the warmth of his body, the subtle tension in his muscles, the scent of his cologne filling my senses. "No problem," I replied, forcing myself to meet his gaze. The familiar world outside the bathroom receded, and a neighborly favor felt hollow even to my own ears. A feeble attempt to maintain the illusion of normalcy. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, his eyes lingering on my lips for a fraction of a second longer. A subtle gesture that made my heart race. "You're always so helpful," he said, his voice soft, his gaze dropping to my hands. It's nice." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening, a mixture of apprehension and excitement swirling within me. The air between us crackled with an energy that felt both thrilling and dangerous, a silent acknowledgement of the forbidden desires that were beginning to surface. The small space of the bathroom, the close proximity of our bodies, created a sense of intimacy that was both intoxicating and terrifying. I was acutely aware of every movement, every gesture, every flicker of expression on his face. The air charged with unspoken tension. I straightened up, putting some distance between us, trying to regain control, but the desire remained, a persistent hum beneath the surface, tempting me to cross a line that should never be crossed. I tried to focus on the task at hand, tightening the connection with deliberate, almost exaggerated motions. He was still close, watching me intently, his body language a mix of vulnerability and quiet confidence that was both captivating and unsettling. As I tightened the last bolt, our eyes met again, and in that moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of us in the charged, intimate space of the bathroom. The push and pull dynamic was in full force, an invisible battle between desire and fear, between the familiar comfort of my old life and the dangerous allure of the unknown. The question was not if, but when the dam would break, and little did I know I was about to be lost for words. I stepped back from the sink, the task complete, but the tension in the air remained thick and palpable. The bathroom, with its small confines and lingering scent of soap and metal, felt less like a space for repairs and more like a stage for a forbidden encounter. David's eyes were still on me, his gaze intense and unreadable, a mixture of curiosity, longing, and a hint of something more dangerous. He had not moved, still too close, and I could feel my own body reacting to his proximity, a rising heat that both scared and thrilled me. "Well," I said, forcing a casual tone, my voice still trembling slightly, "I think that should do it." I turned toward the door, wanting to escape the suffocating intimacy of the space, but he didn't move. His presence, a tangible barrier in my path. "Thanks again, Michael," he said, his voice a low murmur, barely audible above the soft gurgling of the now-functioning sink. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us, his hand reaching out, a gesture that both thrilled and terrified me. His fingers brushed against my arm, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of electricity through me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The contact was brief, but enough to shatter the fragile facade of normalcy I had been trying to maintain. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that moment the world seemed to blur. The familiar boundaries between neighbor and friend, husband and stranger, disappeared in the charged atmosphere of the room. "I should probably get going," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, a desperate attempt to break the spell. "My wife will be home soon." I started to move again, but this time his hand closed around my arm, a firm but gentle grip that stopped me in my tracks. "Wait," he said, his voice husky, his eyes pleading. "Before you go, there's something I want to ask." My heart hammered. I knew what was coming, the inevitable collision, the transgression that was about to unfold. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. He released my arm, his fingers lingering for a moment longer, the heat of his touch searing into my skin. He stepped closer, his body almost touching mine, the scent of his cologne filling my senses. "I've been thinking about this all night," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes locking onto mine, a mixture of vulnerability and determination within their depths. "About you." The words hung in the air, a confession of the forbidden desire. My breath hitched, my mind reeling. I don't know what to say," I stammered. He took another step closer, closing the distance between us, our bodies almost touching. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered, his gaze fixed on my lips, his eyes filled with an unspoken longing that mirrored my own. Just let this happen." He reached out again, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of my jawline, the touch sending shivers down my spine. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, the forbidden thrill washing over me. The ears of longing suddenly found their voice. The guilt and fear still lingered, but were overshadowed by a rising tide of desire. The unspoken promise hung heavy, an invitation to cross a line. What happened next left me frozen. His touch was a spark igniting a fire that had been smoldering within me for far too long. I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze, the desire mirroring my own. The world outside the confines of that small bathroom ceased to exist, replaced by a powerful, irresistible pull that drew us closer. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me towards him. His intentions were no longer hidden, no longer needing words. "Michael," he breathed, my name a soft whisper. His gaze dropped to my lips, a silent invitation. The tension was a palpable force, making my skin tingle. I didn't resist, I couldn't. The longing that had been building within me, the years of unspoken desire, the yearning for connection I hadn't felt in so long, was finally demanding to be acknowledged. I closed the distance between us, my lips meeting his in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. A collision of pent-up emotions and forbidden desires. The kiss deepened, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me closer, his body molding against mine. The only reality was the feel of his lips, the taste of him, the intoxicating scent of his cologne. My hands moved instinctively, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. He pulled back slightly, his gaze searching mine, his eyes a mixture of vulnerability and determination. Is this wrong? I wondered. Am I ruining everything? This feels so right. The words hung in the air. He leaned in again, his lips brushing against mine as if seeking permission. I didn't hesitate, meeting his kiss with a longing that mirrored his own. The desire surged through me. His hand moved lower, tracing the curve of my neck, the delicate line of my collarbone. The heat of his touch burned through my clothes. My breath hitched, a soft gasp escaping my lips. The intensity of his touch sent shivers of anticipation through my body. He leaned in again, his lips finding the sensitive skin of my neck, his tongue tracing a slow, tantalizing path toward my ear, making me tremble. "You're driving me crazy," he murmured against my skin, his words a mix of confession and demand. And as the intensity built, a sudden sharp knock echoed through the apartment, a jarring intrusion that shattered the spell. The unexpected interruption sent a jolt of reality through me. The world outside, the responsibilities and obligations I had momentarily forgotten, crashed back into sharp focus. The forbidden intimacy we had been about to share suddenly felt dangerous and reckless. What was I doing? What had I been thinking? And even worse, what if that knock was my wife? I pulled back, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind reeling. The sudden sharp interruption broke the spell, and I knew that the moment was gone, leaving us both breathless, our bodies still humming with the lingering embers of desire. What happened next was something I could never have imagined. The knock echoed again, more insistent, shattering the intimacy. I pulled away, my heart pounding. Who could that be? I stammered, my voice trembling, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. David stepped back, his gaze a mixture of apprehension and frustration. "I don't know," he replied, his voice low, his body language tense. "Maybe it's just a neighbor." The thought of being discovered sent a shiver of fear down my spine. "David," he said, which forced me to take a deep breath. Then the door was opened, and my heart sank when I saw who it was. It was Mrs. Henderson from down the hall, her face drawn with concern. "David, dear," she said, her voice laced with worry. "I saw your light on, and I thought you might be hurt. I heard a loud noise earlier." She paused, her eyes widening as she took in my presence. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company." Her eyes flicked from David to me, a question mark hanging in the air, an unspoken accusation. "It's okay, Mrs. Henderson," I said, forcing a smile, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm just helping David with a plumbing issue." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, a feeble attempt to maintain the illusion of normalcy. She raised an eyebrow, her gaze lingering on me, her expression betraying her suspicion. "Oh," she said slowly, her voice laced with doubt. "Well, if you need anything, dear, just let me know." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hall, the weight of her judgment heavy in the silence she left behind. I closed the door, my back leaning against it. The relief I felt was short-lived. I was still in David's apartment, and the tension between us, though momentarily diffused, was still simmering beneath the surface. "That was close," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Too close." He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze avoiding mine, a mix of fear and frustration evident in his body language. "Yeah," I replied, my voice trembling. Too close for comfort. The moment had passed, the intimacy broken, replaced by a chilling unease. The push and pull had shifted again, the tension now a mixture of desire and fear. "I think you should probably go," he began, his voice trailing off, his eyes finally meeting mine, a flicker of longing still evident within their depths. "I think you should probably go." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The rejection, a sharp physical blow. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I should." The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken desires and unfulfilled promises. I turned and walked towards the door, my footsteps heavy and reluctant. The pull of his presence still a powerful force, making it difficult to leave. As I reached the threshold, I paused, turning back to face him one last time, a silent question hanging in the air between us. "What now?" I wanted to ask, but the words remained unspoken, trapped within the confines of my heart. He met my gaze, his eyes searching mine, the vulnerability and longing still present, but now mixed with a resignation, a sense of defeat. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but we'll see." And that was it, a goodbye without a farewell, a promise without a commitment. The unspoken desires still hanging heavy in the air, a reminder of the forbidden path we had almost taken. And as I stepped out into the quiet hallway, I knew that this night was not over. It was just taking an unexpected turn, and perhaps that turn would lead us to more dangerous, exciting grounds than I could have ever imagined. The night was young, and the story was far from over. And little did I know, the best was yet to come. The walk back to my house was a blur. The cool night air did little to calm the turmoil raging within me. The encounter with Mrs. Henderson had been a reminder of the precariousness of my situation, yet the desire for David remained. I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, the feel of his touch, the taste of his lips. I stepped into my house, the silence pressing in on me, heavy and suffocating, a stark contrast to the charged intimacy I had just experienced. The TV flickered in the corner, the same mindless drone I had left behind, but held no comfort, no distraction from the turbulent emotions swirling within me. My wife will be home soon, and I knew I would have to pretend that everything was normal, that I hadn't just been on the precipice of a life-altering decision, that I hadn't almost succumbed to a forbidden desire that had shaken me to my core. I wandered into the living room, my mind still replaying the events, the suggestive glances, the lingering touches, the almost kiss that had left me breathless. I knew that I should stay away from David, but the thought of never seeing him again sent a shiver of longing through me. I sank onto the couch, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through social media, but my mind kept drifting back to David, his image a constant presence in my thoughts. And then a text message popped up on my screen. It was from David. "Are you okay?" The simple question sent a jolt of electricity through me. My heart pounded in my chest, the desire to reply almost overwhelming. The thrill of the forbidden surged through me. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, a silent battle raging within me. I knew that I should ignore it, that I should put an end to this dangerous flirtation, but the pull was too strong, the temptation too powerful to resist. I typed back a simple, "Yeah, I'm fine. You?" The reply came back almost instantly. "Not really, thinking about you." The words hit me, the honesty of his confession sending a shiver of anticipation. "Me too," I typed back, the words a silent confession of the desires that had been brewing within me. The silence stretched between us, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air, a promise of what was to come. Then another message popped up on my screen, a simple invitation that sent my heart racing. "Come back. Please." The word was a command, a plea, a forbidden invitation to cross a line. The push and pull now an irresistible force. And as I stared at the message on my screen, I knew that I was about to make a decision that would forever alter the course of my life. The text message pulsed with a dangerous allure. "Come back, please." The words were a call to a place I knew I shouldn't go, but the pull was too strong. My heart hammered, a war between my desire and my sense of right and wrong. I stood up from the couch, my body moving as if under its own volition, drawn by an invisible force, a pull that defied all logic and reason. The house seemed to fade away, the familiar walls and furniture blurring into an indistinct background. The only reality was the anticipation of the encounter that lay ahead. I walked to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob, the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. The short walk back to David's apartment felt like a journey into the unknown. The cool night air did little to calm the heat that was building within me. The forbidden thrill mingled with a sense of apprehension, a fear of the consequences that would inevitably follow. I knocked lightly on his door, the sound almost swallowed by the pounding of my heart. He opened it almost immediately, his eyes meeting mine, a mixture of longing and barely concealed anticipation within their depths. He didn't speak, simply stepped aside, his gaze a silent invitation to enter, to cross the final threshold into the unknown. I moved past him, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, a sense of reckless abandon washing over me. The apartment seemed different, the familiar space now charged with an undeniable intimacy. The unspoken desires that had been simmering between us now a tangible presence, heavy and intoxicating. He closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the silence, a sound that seemed to seal our fate, locking us in a world of our own making, a space where the rules of everyday life no longer applied. He turned to face me, his eyes fixed on mine, his gaze a silent question, a plea for confirmation. I didn't speak, simply stepped towards him, drawn by an invisible force. My hands reached out, my fingers tracing the curve of his jawline, the touch sending shivers down my spine. He leaned into my touch, his hand finding mine, lacing his fingers through mine, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through my body. His eyes searched mine, a mixture of vulnerability and raw hunger that both thrilled and terrified me. His lips met mine again, the kiss more urgent, more desperate than before, a collision of pent-up desires and unspoken longings. His tongue danced against mine, exploring the contours of my mouth, teasing, tempting, igniting a fire that had been threatening to consume us. My hands moved over his body, exploring the contours of his neck, the curve of his shoulders, the muscles of his arms. Each touch sending a wave of sensation through me, a desire to lose myself in the forbidden pleasure that he offered. The kiss deepened, the world around us fading away. The only reality was the feel of his lips against mine, the taste of his skin, the intoxicating scent of his cologne, a heady mix of musk and citrus that filled my senses. His hands moved lower, exploring the curve of my back, the heat of his touch burning through my clothes, sending shivers down my spine. He pulled away, his gaze fixed on mine, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The intensity of the moment almost overwhelming. "Michael," he breathed my name, a soft murmur that sent shivers down my spine. He moved closer, his body almost touching mine, the heat of his touch a tangible presence. The unspoken desires now a shared reality. He pulled me towards him, our bodies colliding with a soft thud. The weight of him against me was a heady mix of fear and excitement, a surrender to the forbidden desires that had been brewing between us since our first encounter. The push and pull had finally ended, replaced by an intoxicating surrender. The rules of our everyday lives suspended, leaving only the raw, undeniable pull of the moment. And in that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. It was just him and me, our bodies pressed close, our desires finally unleashed, a collision of pent-up longing, the climax of a night that had been building towards this forbidden embrace. The night was now entering a dangerous new territory where there was no going back, and little did I know, everything was about to change. The world around us seemed to slowly come back into focus, the intensity of the moment gradually fading, leaving us breathless and trembling in its wake. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft rhythm of our breathing. The lingering scent of our bodies was a reminder of the forbidden time we had just shared. We lay tangled together, his body pressed against mine, the heat of his skin a comfort and a reminder of what had just transpired. The line we had crossed, the unspoken desires that had finally been fulfilled. A mixture of guilt and exhilaration washed over me, the reality of our actions crashing down on me with the force of a tidal wave. I had crossed a line, a boundary I had never intended to breach, and now there was no turning back. The forbidden fruit had been tasted, the consequences, whatever they may be, now unavoidable. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to make sense of the turbulent emotions swirling within me. The mix of shame, desire, and a strange, almost unsettling sense of satisfaction. He stirred beside me, his hand finding mine, lacing his fingers through mine, the contact sending a jolt of tenderness through me. I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze, a mix of vulnerability and quiet confidence within their depths. The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air between us. The uncertainty of the future, now a palpable presence. What would happen now? What would we do next? Where do we go from here? I don't know what to say, he began, his voice a low murmur, his gaze searching mine, his hand tightening around mine, a silent plea for reassurance. Neither do, he replied, my voice barely above a whisper, the words an honest confession of my own confusion and uncertainty. This shouldn't have happened. Even as the words came out, I knew that they weren't entirely true. The intimacy had been wrong, forbidden, and dangerous, but I could not deny the raw connection between us, the unspoken desires that had finally found their release. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken questions and unfulfilled desires. The dynamic had shifted again, the desire for each other battling with the guilt and the fear of the consequences of our actions. The weight of our transgressions settled heavy in the air. We had crossed the point of no return, and now were left to deal with the aftermath, the complicated mess of emotions, the raw vulnerability that had been exposed, the forbidden desires that had been unleashed. He pulled back slightly, his gaze fixed on me, his eyes searching mine, the vulnerability mixed with a quiet determination. And I knew that we were now on the precipice of an unknown future where nothing would ever be the same. He reached out again, his hand cupping my face, his thumb tracing the curve of my jawline, the touch sending shivers down my spine. A familiar spark that sent shivers through my body, a lingering reminder of the intimacy we had shared, the desires that had become so real. I know, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, but I don't regret it. The words hit me hard, and I felt a pang of longing, a recognition of the shared desires that had brought us to this point, a forbidden attraction that was now impossible to deny. Neither do I confessed, the words a silent plea for understanding, for acceptance of the complicated mess we had created. We lay in silence for a while, the only sound the soft rhythm of our breathing. The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. The night had reached a new phase, the feelings of intensity having been shared, the forbidden desires having been fulfilled. But now we were faced with the reality of the situation, the difficult decision of what to do next. The story was not over yet. The night had changed everything, and the question of what came next now loomed over us. He stirred beside me, his hand finding mine again, lacing his fingers through mine, the contact sending a jolt of tenderness, a silent reassurance in the face of the unknown. The push and pull had subsided, replaced by a sense of quiet contemplation, a shared understanding of the complexity of the situation, the dangerous path we had chosen. I should go, I said, my voice a low murmur, my eyes avoiding his, the weight of our actions pressing down on me, a silent acknowledgement of the reality of the situation and the complications that now lay ahead. Yeah, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, the word laced with a bittersweet mix of longing and resignation. I guess you should. We moved apart, the physical separation mirroring the emotional distance that was beginning to grow between us. Unspoken questions remained between us. What now? What would we do? What was our future? We got dressed in silence, the unspoken desires now overshadowed by the heavy weight of reality. The affection of the moment was gone, replaced by nervous tension. The fear of the consequences of our actions, now palpable. The knowledge of the line we had crossed, a heavy burden we both now carried. He walked me to the door, the steps heavy and reluctant, our eyes meeting one last time, a silent understanding passing between us, a shared acknowledgement of the unknown desire that had brought us to this point, in the unknown future that now lay ahead. He started, his voice trembling slightly, his eyes searching mine, the unspoken questions still hanging heavy in the air between us, the unspoken longing still evident within their depths. But the words failed him. He couldn't articulate what was in his mind. The uncertainty, the fear, the longing, the mix of emotions that seemed too complex to express in words. He simply looked at me for a moment, a silent plea for understanding, a desperate attempt to convey the unspoken feelings that were still simmering beneath the surface. "Take care," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the words a hollow attempt to break the tension, to find a way to say goodbye without actually doing so. He managed a small, sad smile, the vulnerability still present in his eyes. "You too," he replied, his voice soft, his gaze lingering on mine. And then he turned away, the door closing behind him, the sound echoing in the silence. A finality that felt both necessary and unbearable. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew that everything had changed. The night had left an indelible mark on both of us. And now the future was uncertain. The story was not over, it was just paused. The next chapter still unwritten. The consequences of our actions still unknown, leaving us to wonder what to do next. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Share your thoughts. How did this story make you feel? And if you have any personal experiences or stories you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned for more emotional, romantic, and heart-wrenching tales right here on LGBT Stories.